You know, one of the things that really frustrated me when I was younger and trying to make sense out of religion was trying to understand exactly what enlightenment is. We all hear this term, and I just sat down here and I watched this video that just came out. Well, I guess it was actually 4 years ago by Max Durat. Where he's talking about the song by Tool, 46 and 2, where it's all about shadow integration. And he makes several references in here to enlightenment, which really reminded me of when I was younger. And I would ask myself, what is enlightenment? You know, I'm a math major, so I mean, I love specifics. Like, if you're going to use a word, I want to know exactly what it means. And you know, at some point when I had my own mystical experience, I really did feel that I had genuinely experienced a form of enlightenment. And I say a form of enlightenment because I don't think enlightenment is necessarily one concise thing. It is not one isolated experience. Really, you know, if you look at the very essence of the word enlightenment, right? There's an emphasis on light and an emphasis on awakening. So really, in some sense, you could use the word awakening as a synonym for enlightenment. But awakening to what, or awakening from what, right? In some sense, what I think this really means is that enlightenment is the experience of awakening from the dream of your life. That is, you know, we know cognitively speaking, and in terms of our neurology, that everything we experience is generated in the brain. Consider the fact that your brain is locked inside your skull and it has no direct access to the outside world. A lot of people don't really stop and think about this. You know, for instance, your eyes are not projecting consciousness out onto the world. Rather, electrical signals are passing through the eyes, up the optic nerve to the back of your brain, and then your brain is using that information to construct your experience of reality. And this is true of all our sense organs. All this information is going inward, right? So we have all this sensory information that is moving up through our nervous system. It's moving toward our brain. And then the brain has to put all this together and construct an experience. Well, how is it constructing the experience, right? And what is the experience? The essence here is to understand that the brain is constructing a simulation. That's the brain's job. It has to construct a simulation of the outside world, right? You don't see or experience the outside world directly. That's why things like hallucinations and optical illusions can occur. You see things that are not there. Well, how is that possible if you're looking directly at the outside world, right? It's only possible if you're not looking at the outside world directly. Rather, you're looking at a simulation or a model of the outside world that's being generated in your head. And furthermore, we know that this model is different from person to person, that not every individual experiences the world in precisely the same way. For instance, a very simple example would be people who are colorblind. They move through the same world as you and me, seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, but their experience of color is radically different. They don't experience the same colors as you and me. And you may say, oh, well, that's because there's something wrong, right? That there's, there's a flaw, there's a disability, something like that. Well, in many ways, I mean, a bat or some other animal that sees, you know, in a wider range of colors. For instance, some animals I know can see in ultraviolet. Some animals can pick up higher or lower frequencies of electromagnetic radiation. So to them, we would be colorblind, right? So are we disabled? The point I'm trying to make is that this distinction between people who have normal sight and people who are colorblind is relatively arbitrary. One is not broken and the other is, you know, fixed. You know, it's just a different way of experiencing reality. But ultimately, all of our subjective experiences are constructed respective to our own unique brain, to our own neurology, right? And so what I'm getting at is that when you experience your life as you're moving through your day, you're not really in moving through the world, not directly. You're moving through a simulation of the world that is constructed in your head. You are living inside of a dream, essentially. And there are simple ways to prove this, simple ways to demonstrate it. My favorite way to demonstrate it is to simply point out, for instance, that the color pink does not exist. Look at the electromagnetic frequencies that exist on the EM spectrum, ranging from, gamma rays down to radio waves, right? You look at this, it's a linear spectrum. It ranges from one end to the other with high frequencies, gamma rays, on one end, and low frequencies, radio waves, on the other end, right? It's a spectrum. It's linear. It's not a circular thing. It's not a wheel, right? And yet if we ask people to display their experience of colors, they display a color wheel. We've all learned color wheels in school, right? But that's not how light works. Light is not a wheel. It's a spectrum. It's linear. Right? So then why do we display it as a wheel? Well, that's because that's how we experience it. And most especially what our brain does is it takes everything from the ultraviolet end of the spectrum and everything from the infrared end of the spectrum, folds it over, and in that little gap between red and purple, our brain just stuffs in the color pink. It uses pink as a fill-in. Your brain does this a lot, actually. In fact, every time you see the color yellow, you're really not seeing yellow. You don't have any yellow light receptors in your eyes. You only have red, green, and blue. And we take advantage of this in technology all the time. If you get really close to a television screen and you look at the pixels, you'll see that there are only 3 colors, red, green, and blue. And that's because physicists and engineers have figured out that they can make your brain see any color they want by just simply relaying differing quantities of red, green, and blue. It's ingenious, actually. If an extraterrestrial came to planet Earth with a different system for seeing, our screens would look all wrong. They would look completely incorrect. For instance, yellow would not be yellow. Like, for instance, if an extraterrestrial came to Earth with eyes that covered the full visible spectrum, they would see only red, green, and blue dots. They would look at our screens and say, why is everything on your screen red, green, and blue? Where are all the other colors? Right? They'd be confused. And we'd be saying, what do you mean where are all the colors? They're right there. And this is what I mean, where, it's arbitrary to say that colorblind people are colorblind, because truth be told, we're just as colorblind. Everyone is colorblind to some extent. You literally hallucinate every time you see the color yellow, because you're not actually seeing yellow. You're actually seeing a little bit of red and a little bit of, a little bit of red and a little bit of blue, or no? Anyways, I'm not here to get into colors. The point is, your mind is constructing a model of reality, right? It's not actually experiencing the outside world directly. And so the interesting question is to ask, okay, hang on a minute. If my brain is constructing a model of reality, it's not actually interacting with the outside world directly, then what is this thing, right? What is this that I'm experiencing? I can see a camera here in front of me, candles to my right, I'm seeing all these colors, and you're telling me none of that exists, that all of that is in my head, right? Well, what's actually out there, and we know this thanks to science, is that outside the body, or outside the mind rather, objectively, what we really have are, as far as we can tell, just mathematical phenomena. It's really better understood as data rather than, things, I think. Because, when we analyze the nature of the universe and we really observe the nature of subatomic particles, things of this kind, right? What we find are just mathematical functions. We don't actually find any things. For instance, if you take an atom and you divide it up into tinier and tinier pieces, eventually it all just goes back to space. I mean, and this is really, quantum field theory deals with looking at subatomic particles as expressions of various energy frequencies within various fields that are simultaneously layered over one another in the same field of space. And again, I'm probably going a little down the rabbit hole for some of you guys here. But, the whole point here is that, this experience we're having is very much constructed in the mind, and it relies on data or information that is gained from the outside world. And that outside world is perhaps best understood as a data set rather than, it's one thing I often think about is there's really no reason to assume that the physical universe around you is in fact three-dimensional. It could just be, we for instance, we look at computers, and computers relay data to a screen, and then it's in the screen that we experience our three-dimensional reality, right? The physical universe we occupy could in fact just be a two-dimensional data set that's stretched out over a plane, and then it's our brains as a part of that data set that actually model and construct our three-dimensional experience of reality within our heads. In fact, there are some fields of physics that seem to suggest something like this. For instance, it's called brain theory, where one suggestion is that, in a higher dimensional reality, our universe could have been the result of two brains in a multiverse coming into contact with one another. But again, this is getting way into physics. But the point, the really important thing to note here is that the world that is out there, is real, but it's real in the sense that math is real, right? It's real in the sense of a consistent data set. And really this data, of which our body and our physical brain is a part, has constructed within it this system of this mind-body system, this brain-body system that we occupy. And, this system ultimately has been constructed through evolution to produce within us this subjective experience of reality that we're all sharing, more or less. I say more or less because, again, like I pointed out earlier, right, we're all experiencing a slightly different version. Like, for instance, you could ask the question, how do I know my experience of red is the same as yours? Maybe we've both grown up, and subjectively in your brain, when you see the color red, you're actually seeing what I would call blue. But we've both grown up and learned to call it red, so we both see it, we say that's red, and we carry on, never realizing how radically different our subjective experience really is, right? So understanding this, right, and why I've kind of prefaced all this before really talking about enlightenment is because the really important question is to say, okay, well, if the brain is responsible for constructing this model of reality, then where is that model? Right? Where is it? Because what I'm seeing, what I'm tasting, what I'm touching, what I'm smelling, it all appears to be part of one consistent thing, right? It's a holistic experience. This is one of the confusing things about consciousness, right? The part of me that's seeing is also the same as the part of me that's hearing. That's the same as the part of me that's feeling. That's the same as the part of me that's thinking, right? I'm experiencing all these things simultaneously as a unity. It's not like I'm saying to myself, oh, well, one conscious part of me does the thinking and another conscious part of me does the seeing, right? No, it's one individual. It's one whole collective experience. And so one of the things that I find really meaningful and that I find terribly useful in making sense out of this is the Buddhist understanding that mind is like space. Mind is a space. It is a space. It is just the way you would think of, outer space, a three-dimensional cube of space. You imagine it that way. And in that space are all of the phenomena we experience. So for instance, I love to play around on 3D modeling software like Blender, and you can construct things in that space, but it's a space, it is a space. I mean, there's 3 dimensions in there. You can move through it, manipulate phenomena, right? That is a space. But what's interesting is there are not 3 dimensions of reality inside the computer. There doesn't have to be. We can model that 3-dimensional experience of reality simply using orthogonal data sets, and that does the job. And there's really no reason why the brain couldn't be doing the same thing, right? There's really no reason. And so everything you're doing as a conscious being is happening through this model. It's happening in this data set, in this 3-dimensional reality constructed in your head. And this is a space. It is a space proper. And the interesting thing is that when you want to understand the nature of mind, so for instance, scientists have done a lot in helping us to understand the nature of the mind and the nature of consciousness by looking at our neurology. But what we really arrive at is a tremendous block. Because when we dissect the human brain, we get down to the level of the neuron, and all we see are, neurotransmitters passing back and forth, electrical charges, ion charges, and beyond that, there's nothing, right? We don't see, for instance, anything in the brain to suggest where exactly consciousness should be found, right? Which is troubling, and it's a big problem for neuroscience right now, right? Why is the brain conscious? What is there going on in the brain physically that would suggest that there should be any consciousness there whatsoever. And personally myself, I think a key insight to making sense out of this is to really understand this model, to understand this notion, this Buddhist idea of that mind is like space. And if you understand that mind is like space and that phenomena occupy that space, then you begin to recognize that mind is space, that consciousness is space. Because if you close your eyes and you take a moment, and this is what you do in meditation, these are the kinds of things, and again, this comes from an internal form of observation. So unlike material science, right, we're not trying to investigate from the outside in, rather as Buddhists, we investigate from the inside out. And what you do is you spend enough time in meditation and you clear your thoughts, right, you push everything away, and you rest in the nature of mind. And it takes a while. This is called Shinne meditation, where you attempt to rid the mind of all thoughts, rid the mind of all phenomena. So you will see in meditation, you'll concentrate, right? And phenomena will arise. So thoughts, you get a thought here, a thought there, a visualization appears, and all of these things keep appearing, right? And as you get more accustomed to meditating and you spend more time, what happens is you get these wider gaps in which nothing arises. There are no thoughts, there are no visualizations, there's nothing. And what happens when you do this, when you spend enough time doing this, is you begin to recognize the space in which these phenomena arise. And it's not, I wouldn't even call it a three-dimensional space. That would be too visualized, right? Rather, it is... perhaps the best way to describe it would be just a rumbling of potentiality. It's there's like a rumbling of potentiality there, and it could manifest as 3 dimensions of space, it could manifest as a thought, it could manifest as all sorts of different things, but ultimately there's a space there. And again, I refrain from necessarily imposing 3 dimensions on it, but mind is a space. It's a sphere, it's a space, it's an environment in which things can arise. And what you recognize in meditation is that this space is saturated in consciousness. It's filled with it. Your consciousness extends out in every direction and it fills that space. So if a thought arises in that space, you are immediately present to it. There's no gap between your consciousness and the thought. Consciousness and the thought are one. They're immersed in one another. They're immanent to one another. You cannot have one without the other. And as soon as the consciousness is lost, the thought is lost. It ceases to exist. And so the consciousness is the space in which these phenomena arise. It is the space. And so the really powerful thing that comes through this is, as Lama Ole Nidal beautifully puts it, mind is like space, and space is not a thing. It's not created, it's not destroyed, it's never born, it never dies, it's not going to go away or come back again, right? Space is the fundamental basis of reality. And so if mind is like space, it's really a completely logical conclusion to draw to suggest that mind, like space, cannot die, cannot be born, cannot be created. And what you really recognize, and this is the important bit, is that everything, and I mean everything, including your notion of self and your memories, your body, your everything you have ever experienced, everything that you think you are, has arisen in this space. Now there are 2 questions. Are you the phenomena in that space, or are you the space? Right? Imagine this. Imagine if you were to die and you were to forget all of your memories. You would forget your entire childhood. You would forget everything you had ever known. And your mind was just reduced to the most serene state of simplicity. And then someone took that serene space, that empty space of mind with no memories, no phenomena, nothing, right? Completely void, and moved it into another body. How do you know that isn't how you got here? How do you know that isn't how you were born? That's the Buddhist notion of reincarnation, that mind cannot be created or destroyed. because its fundamental nature is like space. And ultimately, the only thing that happens when we die is that the phenomena that have occupied that space of mind dissolve. And so this can really help to bring on a state of fearlessness. If it's true that mind is like space and it can never be created or destroyed, then one adopts a posture of inner peace, of recognizing fearlessness as being the fundamental nature of your being, that you are completely and utterly free from suffering, so long as you allow yourself to detach and let go of all of these so-called created phenomena, right? These manifested phenomena. And so the ambition really, and this is where we kind of branch now into a little bit of modern analytical psychology, the ambition now is to really integrate a greater portion of what's called the unconscious mind. So in that space of mind, there is a space we are aware of, but in our mind, there are also spaces we are not aware of. So for instance, you see someone you recognize and you say, oh, I know that person, but I can't remember their name, right? And you go, you try to remember it and you keep thinking, you're like, oh, is it John? Is it Jim? You know, who is it? And then all of a sudden it comes to you, oh, yeah, Josh, now I remember. Well, that information was obviously in your head, but where was it? Right? You couldn't access it. You know, your consciousness is like a spotlight and you're shining it around in your memories going, is it here? You know, is it there? I can't, where did I put this guy's name? You know, it's like you're looking through a library, but where is this library? What library, right? What the hell are we talking about? You know, so and again, this is kind of where you go into Buddhism, where you say, well, the memories exist in another field, in another part of the mind, in a space that our consciousness does not currently or presently occupy, and that there are certain aspects of the mind that are simply inaccessible to the ego. It's sort of like if you go into an office building, and there are restricted areas, right? There are areas you are not allowed to go. You know, it's interesting because you then ask the question, because the ego has this notion of self and it fancies itself the CEO of the corporation, right? It says, I'm running the show, aren't I? I mean, I'm making all the decisions. I'm managing all of our affairs. I look after the memories. I interact with the world. What do you mean there are restricted areas? Who has more authority than me in this corporation, right? That's the ego's notion of self, right? And what you recognize is that, in fact, you are not the boss of the psyche. You think you are, but you're not. In fact, there is a higher authority, and that authority is the Jungian self-archetype, Christ that lives within the heart, the Buddha nature, right? Krishna. Different religions imagine it in different ways, but it is this all-encompassing spirit that animates, sustains, and fulfills all of us. It animates the world. And this is really where you arrive at the Jungian notion of the collective unconscious. That's to say that when you become increasingly aware of the space of mind, what you recognize is that you are not one space as opposed to other spaces. That's to say, you know, it is not like consciousness is this little unit and you get your own little unit of consciousness and you're isolated here and you got your own little space of consciousness in your mind and that's yours. That's not what's happening here. Rather, there is just one continuum of mind. There is only one mind, one all-encompassing mind of which you are but a part. You are but a singular expression of that wider collective mind. And this goes further, and if you recognize this within yourself and you experience it, this is really another level of fearlessness because you recognize that you are just merely one expression of this immense collective, this one collective of awareness. And the way we observe this, we don't have to accept this on blind faith. This is empirical, it's testable, falsifiable, if you will. Right? What you can do is you journey into altered states of consciousness. Now, an altered state of consciousness is simply mucking about with the brain's wiring, right? I've often had this discussion with atheists and unbelievers, and they'll say, well, it's no wonder that you've experienced this or that, right? Altered states of consciousness mess with the wiring of the brain. But what people don't understand is that, right, when you introduce, say, fasting or prayer or trance or psychoactive substances or, hypnagogic states, whatever variety you want to work with, right? All of these different things, they muck about with the brain's ability to construct our model, right? So our brain is very good at constructing this model of reality that we're all living in, right? And the question becomes, okay, what happens when the model, or when the brain, has a hiccup? The brain is this world-making machine. It's literally constructing this model of reality. But what happens if we throw a chemical in there, or, the heart stops beating, right? What happens when the brain, the neurochemical physical brain, loses its ability to sustain the model, right? What happens? And to me, there are two ways of causing my computer to crash, right? There are two ways I could do it. One way is to reach down there in the wall and pull the cord out. That's death, right? You've completely shut down the computer's ability to construct the model. Done, right? The other way is to introduce so much noise into the data that the data essentially becomes meaningless, right? That it just becomes a chaotic noise, and the computer can no longer construct any notion of reality. Perhaps you could set up a big, electromagnetic pulse that just, sends random chaos into all the wires. It would completely dissolve the model, right? You'd get nothing meaningful out of the machine. Those are two ways of really disrupting a computer's ability to construct this inner reality, if you will. To me, the brain is the same way. When you die, that's pulling the plug out of the wall. When you do psychedelics, or you cause other altered states, for instance, trance, in many ways, these are methods that are like an electromagnetic pulse. It just mashes up the brain's ability to effectively construct this model. And, I've experienced this where literally with some psychoactive substances, you will take them and you will watch the world around you just fall apart as if it were merely a dream. And let me tell you, that is a traumatic experience, because you go through your whole life thinking this thing around you is real, and you cling to it, and you put your confidence in it. And when you watch it all go to pieces, for instance, on a DMT trip or something, right, the walls will start vibrating and literally come apart, right? This is an experience of disrupting the brain's ability to construct the model. And what happens is when you enter these altered states, and again, you don't have to use psychedelics. That's only, a good example, especially relevant example for our time. What happens when you do this, when you disrupt your brain's model constructing abilities and you compromise this reality you're living in, what you begin to recognize is an opportunity to explore the nature of mind itself. So rather than moving through the simulation, rather than moving through the model, instead you can move through the nature of mind itself. And this is really where I think the most important religious document that's ever been written, perhaps, next to maybe the Gospels, revealing a little of my bias there. The Mandukya Upanishad talks about this, right? The fourfold nature of reality. You can also find this in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, where, on the conscious level, where we are right now, we are experiencing this waking life. And this is one level of consciousness. This is one mode of consciousness in which the ego is awake and aware, and it's interacting with this reality, and it's dreamlike, but the ego doesn't experience it as dreamlike. The ego experiences it as if it's real. Below this, when I go to sleep at night, right, that model slips away. And what takes its place is a dream model. And so I move through dreams, and there are new realities, new spheres of existence. And this, the interesting thing is that the dream world has its own set of rules. For instance, light switches don't work in dreams. Objects have no mass in dreams, right? You can pick up a mountain if you wanted to. People can fly in dreams. Dreams appear to have access to the future. You can have precognitive dreams about the future. If you don't believe me, I would invite you to even look on Mikey Welsh's Twitter, where he literally predicted his death through a dream. These things happen. Julius Caesar predicted that he'd be assassinated through a dream. Cleopatra tried to convince him not to go to Rome, but he did anyway, right? So it's a fact. I mean, people may struggle with that or be skeptical about it. I've experienced dreams about the future. It's a fact. So in the field of dreams, the mind has access to the future. It has this ability to move through a different kind of space, a different kind of reality. But there are rules which govern that reality. It has its own unique set of rules. Lucid dreamers know all about this. They take advantage of those rules. They play with them. This is really the realm of the gods, right? This is where the gods live, because in a dream, you may see a body of water, but there's nothing preventing that body of water from coalescing and turning into a person, being personified. So this helps to inspire animism, right? This belief that all of the phenomena that we experience in our waking life are in fact animated by spirits, but these spirits are only accessible. You can only have conversations with them in altered states such as dreams, right? So that was really the role of the shaman, right? Was to enter an altered state and to converse with the rivers, to converse with the mountains, to communicate with the sky, and to have these experiences that would allow the shaman to speak and interact with the various intelligences that exist within the phenomena of our lives. The interesting thing to note, though, is remember the wider context here, right? Because these phenomena, especially in the context of dreaming, altered states, you're journeying deeper and deeper into an individual experience that also branches out into a collective. It's literally oxymoronic even to say it out loud. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. Because the more you journey into yourself as an individual, at the same time, the more you somehow mysteriously connect with everybody else. And again, that draws back, I almost visualize a wormhole where it's like, you think you're going into yourself in an isolated way, but in reality it breaks out the other side and you realize it's part of a collective that's shared with everyone. And so really, once you get through into lucid dreaming and interacting with dreaming, and you recognize the dream as a function of your own mind, and all of the different phenomena in the dream are a function of your own mind, then you can break out of the dream. You can recognize the dream is not real. You can wake up and you can escape it. And what you find when you do that is that you are suspended in a vast open void, the abyss. And it extends out in every direction. It's just like if you imagine somebody putting you in the middle of space somewhere, let's say you went off in a spaceship and they went where there's no stars, infinitely far from everything, and you just jumped out the door. That's what it's like. It's, you're just out there and you have no body. You're just this consciousness that is in the midst of this space, and you recognize this as the space of mind, right? And this is the field. This is the environment in which all of these different things take place. If you reach that state, if you can penetrate to that level, while you're awake. So that's to say, when you're, in a state of mind, like the state of mind I'm in right now, to penetrate to that level requires death. You have to die. You will experience what it is to die by going there, because you'll be stripped of every attachment. No attachments can access that space. Everything dissolves. Everything comes apart. Everything returns back to the baseline state of space. And you cannot watch the world dissolve without letting go of it, right? Because again, remember that these phenomena are a function of your mind. And so, the Buddhist interpretation is to say, for instance, if a person dies prematurely, right, they dream their life back into existence. That's what we call ghosts, right? They basically take that space of mind, and through their own emotions, through their own clinging, through their own attachment, they basically oblige their mind to reconstruct and regenerate the entire experience of their lives just as it was when they died. This is how people become trapped in the afterlife, right? So this is a model. This is an interpretation to understand the nature of mind and the nature of reality. And ultimately, when you penetrate to that space of mind, that naked space of mind, the void of dreamless sleep, the Mandukya Upanishad describes it. When you penetrate to that space, a light may appear. And this is the ultimate level of mystical realization. This is enlightenment, is to achieve union with that light. I hear people all the time talk about, enlightenment as if it's just being happy, as if it's just, no, that's not enlightenment, I'm sorry. Enlightenment is penetrating to the very core of your being. It is coming into the void, coming into the abyss. It's a full-fledged confrontation with the fear of death, and it is achieving union with the light, hence enlightenment. And when you see that light, that white light, this is the same light, by the way, that people experience during NDEs. when people have near-death experiences. That light that you see is not like this light. It's not a physical light. It's not a light that just touches the eyes and creates the visual experience of light. Rather, it's a light with substance. I'd almost say that it's creamy. There's like a you know, and again, you know, this is kind of a sense of synesthesia here, right? Because you have to remember, by the time you've reached this point, once you're in that void, you're not really functioning anymore in this, right? So you start experiencing things that are pretty bloody difficult to describe because there's no analog here in our waking experience. But imagine if, when looking at a light, you also tasted, you know, your favorite food, and you also felt within your heart the deepest, most satisfying love, and you were just wrapped in a warm blanket, and the love of your mother was just all around you. It's that kind of a feeling. The light is thick. It's like saturated with love and life and energy and purity. It's everything you've ever wanted, everything you've craved for in your whole life. And what you recognize when you see it is that this is what you really are. This is the essence of your being. This is God. This is the source of life. And it is everything you've ever yearned for, everything you've ever craved, everything you've ever longed for, and that everything you've ever experienced in your life that was ever good, anything, the love of a friend, the warmth of your mother, the satisfaction of being promoted at a job, all of these phenomena are mirrors that are simply reflecting the goodness of that light, or just a part of it, just a piece. Light, like physical light, the light of these candles is good, right? It helps me to see. But that's only one part of the great light. The great light has to be carved up and dissected, that totality, that wholeness. And you get this through different myths, by the way. For instance, the Hindu story of Purusha, the giant who's cut up and his body parts are used to construct the world. You get the same thing with Ymir in Viking mythology. You get this in Egyptian mythology with Atum, when he rises up out of the waters on the top of Mount Benben, and he forms an Ouroboros, autofellatio. This is a whole thing in Egyptian myth, by the way. He represents a totality, a completeness that has to be broken. It has to be severed, right? This is really the Ouroboros, the snake with its tail in its mouth. It's total, it's complete, it's absolute. This is the light. The light in union with the darkness, right? That transcends the darkness. So, this is also what the Gospels are referring to when they say, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, a light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has never put it out, right? This is the transcendent light. And so when we talk about enlightenment, what is enlightenment? Enlightenment is a state of mind in which one has achieved union with this light through transcending the fear of death. And there are approximations to enlightenment. This is why I say I don't think enlightenment is one concise thing, because if you exist in a state of total non-detachment, or total non-attachment, then essentially you have in essence achieved enlightenment. Because again, like I said, to achieve union with that light in essence is to overcome the fear of death. You have to confront the void, you have to confront the abyss, and you have to move through it. This is the root of the shadow, the Jungian shadow. There's no fear greater than the fear of death. There's nothing suppressed in the unconscious more than the fear of death, right? We suppress that more than anything. And when you dig up the shadow and you confront the deepest, darkest, ugliest parts of yourself, and you move through those realities and you penetrate into the literal void, right? Then you discover the light. You discover the root of your being. You discover that there is a light that shines in the darkness that darkness can never put out. And that is the root of your mind. And it's the root of all minds. So that, I often hear Luciferian occult types, they say, you are your own God. Somebody recommended a video like this to me where they're on there, that you are your own God. Bullshit. You're not your own God. That's the ego, right? That's the ego congratulating itself for being the CEO of the corporation. But what that ego doesn't know is there are restricted areas in the unconscious. There are areas the ego cannot go. Literally, when I entered the void of dreamless sleep, when I achieved that emptiness, that void, that abyss, there was an entity there made of light. I believe it was Buddha Amitabha. And the first thing he said to me is, "You're not permitted to be here." Permitted by who? I still think about that. Like, who the hell's permission do I have to get to access the nature of my own mind? This is my mind, God damn it. You know? Who the hell is going to tell me I can't access the nature of my own mind, right? But that was the first thing he said to me. You're not permitted to be here. This is a restricted area, right? You are in a state of consciousness that you are not allowed to occupy because, right, you have to think, okay, there are entities in the depths of the unconscious whose responsibility it is to sustain this dream. It's their job to keep this thing going, right? To keep people afraid, to keep people in cages, to keep them boxed in, to prevent them from waking up. Because if they all woke up, this whole universe would cease. It would just end. The dream is over. Ta-da! That's it. It is very much like the Matrix, where it's like if everybody woke up, then there's no reason to run the simulation anymore, right? That's it. So there are restricted areas, and for good reason. It's what keeps the dream going. It's what keeps this whole thing running. So if you're going to pursue an experience of enlightenment, you have to penetrate into the very core of who and what you are. You have to go to the very source of consciousness. And you do this through meditation, altered states of consciousness, through cultivating morality, and by ultimately accepting the authority and the power of the self. You have to recognize that white light that shines in the darkness of the depths of your being is a power unto itself. It's not subject to you. Okay, and this is where Luciferians and Satanists and these people get it all wrong, right? They're absolutely wrong, and they'll never achieve enlightenment because they have to recognize that they are subject to the power of that light. That light holds the power, not you. You are nothing. You are just a mask that God is wearing, and when you die, He will take the mask off. And the question becomes, are you ready for that? Can you abandon everything you think you are? Can you abandon everything you've ever loved? Can you let go of who you thought you were and realize who you really are, the divine? But that's not a divine in the sense of being an egoist, of saying, I am God. There is no I. That's the point. There is no I. There is no self, as the Buddhists say, right? There is no I. It's an illusion. So to say, I am my own God, get the I out of there. There is no I. There is only God. There is only one continuum. There is no I. And really, that's why all great religions demand the sacrifice of the ego. That's why they demand Christ on the cross, right? They demand the sacrifice. You must sacrifice who you think you are. You have to die in order to become one with the self, in order to become one with the totality. Because as long as you are clinging, and as long as you say me, mine, right? As long as that I gong is resounding in your head, you will continue buying into the illusion that you are separate from the universe. And as long as you are separate from the universe, you will die, right? Because death is dissolution. It's descending into the ocean. It's becoming one with the collective. So as long as you're resisting that, because you're afraid, because you're in protection of the self, then you're always going to be in fear, and you'll be tormented by the demons of your own unconscious that are seeking to achieve union with the collective. They're there to dissolve the ego. I love the way that documentary on the Tibetan Book of the Dead puts it in regards to the wrathful deities. It says the wrathful deities drink the blood of your ego clinging, right? You can just imagine the poor soul of the deceased man clinging to his life. I'm real, I'm me, right? And the wrathful deities are cutting, slaying, drinking the blood of your ego clinging, stripping from you everything you've ever loved, right? Burning your possessions, throwing everything you've cared for into the flames. Why? Because they're bringing you to the realization of the dream. It is only a dream. And your clinging is what is preventing you from waking up. This is what drives reincarnation, right? Souls are not ready to wake up. They confront the afterlife and they go, nope, right? And instead of accepting their fate, their former life is resigned to an unconscious memory, right? They forget who they are. Even the Greeks understood this. I love this in the Orphic Mysteries. It said that in the underworld, in the depths of Hades, there is a fountain of forgetfulness, and the souls of the dead go down into Hades, and the Lord of the underworld gives them a cup of water and says, drink, and when they drink, they forget. Right? They forget their life, they forget who they were, and now their soul is prepared to be reborn. It's prepared for reincarnation. This is a form of letting go as well, but it prevents the individual from truly awakening. So, that's kind of the essence of it, right? Where, you can, I will say this, right? You don't necessarily have to go through and have this full-fledged experience of the white light in order to achieve a form of enlightenment. You can achieve it by simply letting go of everything you hold on to in your present life, resigning yourself over to the unconscious, opening up and meditating, right? I like this in Zen Buddhism. This is actually a beautiful thing, where they say, the practice is enlightenment. Right? So if an individual is practicing Zen effectively, they are enlightened. Even if they haven't had the full-fledged, it's sort of like, how do I put it? It's like maybe you haven't graduated university, but if you're doing the math, you've kind of graduated, right? Maybe you haven't achieved the end, but you're doing the very thing that the end involves. So meditating, being detached, living in equanimity, being peaceful, having a balanced mind, letting go of all phenomena, and recognizing the world around you as merely a dream, that is, in essence, enlightenment. That's the fruit of enlightenment. And so if you're practicing that, even if you haven't gone through the full experience, this is a form of enlightenment. The practice, the successful practice, is the enlightenment. And so, yeah, I hope this gives you guys some insights. When you're going through these religions and you're trying to make sense out of all this, one of the things that's so confusing is the fact that you have so many different religions simply because of the fact that there are so many different ways that we can dream. There are so many different symbols, so many different ways you can conceptualize. But that's the essence of it, is people always come after religion saying, which of these religions is true? Which of these religions is real? And what you have to understand is that when you get into the depths of the unconscious, it's not that you find out the truth. It's not that you discover the real. It's that you realize that truth and real are really just words that only make sense in the context of the dream. And when the dream of reality starts to come apart, then the very notion of true and real becomes relatively superfluous, right? Whatever happens to be relevant to the will of God and to the will of the gods, the lesser spirits that govern and maintain the dream, that's the truth. They decide. The only true truth, the only true reality is the white light, and that's it. Everything else is illusion. That is the only truth. That is the only reality, and nothing about it can be captured in words. So when words try to reach it, they will always fail. They'll always fall off, because the transcendent is wholly transcendent. It's beyond the world. It's beyond the categories of time. It's not this or that. It's wholly transcendent. And so, this helps you to make sense out of why religions have so many contradictions, because religions are functions of the ego in its attempts to conceptualize and ascribe definitions and words and concepts to something which is wholly ineffable and beyond the categories of time. And really, you're talking about visions and revelations that have taken place in dreams, and anyone who knows anything about dreams knows that they're not obliged to follow the rules, the logical rules and conventions of our waking reality, right? Math doesn't really work in dreams, right? The logic doesn't really apply when reality itself starts coming apart. So this is really what you're dealing with, right? And this is why science and religion will always be dichotomies. They'll always be opposites, because science is really about understanding the data that is used to construct this waking experience of reality, whereas religion is really about penetrating beyond that veil, going into the nature of mind itself, and discovering the very roots of consciousness and what it is that keeps us awake and what it is that makes us alive. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you did, leave a comment down below. Be sure to leave me a like. And as always, thanks for watching.